All right, I'm Jackie Porter. I'm here with Anoop and Valerie to discuss Hive KRs and UX KRs, and hopefully we can align them or kind of figure out how they work together. So we have been in an experiment for the past 2 quarters on applying the Hive leadership model, which used to be the United leadership model, in the verify stage. And the Hive is the extension of the quad, which includes infrastructure and security to quality, product, engineering function inside of the teams. And this quarter, we have different KRs that are set based off of KPI attainments at the annual level. And in the handbook, there's this guidance that we're meant to have kind of like an essentialist principle. And we're supposed to be ultra focused on attaining these goals. And that may mean trading off functional KRs in order to attain these stage KRs. So I'm hearing some friction points, and I wanted to set a sync, Anoop, with you, Valerie, and me to kind of talk through how do we reconcile functional KRs with the Hive KRs, and what kind of conversation should we be having? Is this a normal trade-off? Should this happen all the time? What is your expectation? And then hopefully we can level set on that and have a cadence going forward.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there has to be some, obviously, because every team is looking at how to make that function provide value. And if we all try to maximize each function sort of value contribution, then chances are we are not doing a good thing with respect to maximizing customer needs or business needs in the short term. So the idea is that the fact that we are experiencing friction now is a great thing, because we were already experiencing it. We just didn't talk about it. Now you're bringing it to surface ahead of the quarter, so we can actually have a meaningful discussion, so that when the Hive aligns on the KRs, we are all aligned and we are rooting for each other to succeed instead of pulling it, apart. This also sometimes happens because we ask each functional team to do things independent of the other functional team, right? So we will ask UX, I need you to improve usability, and I want to set an ambitious, audacious goal. So I'm going to ask you to go from 67 to 72 in 1 quarter of Susco. Now, that means you pedal to the metal. If UX does everything in their capability, we may still not meet it, but we'll try. We do the same thing on the engineering side. We do the same thing on the product side. We are trying to do the same thing with infra, where we ask infra to reduce cost and increase reliability in a quarter and do hairy, audacious goals. So I think this is expected. And I think what we should be doing, therefore, is taking a look at the broader business and perspective and the actual debt, and then making relentless prioritization. So, for example, if the Hive of Verify says, hey, reliability is the biggest thing that's hurting us right now, and tech debt is the biggest thing that's hurting us right now. So let's all as a team align that that's the biggest contribution for this quarter. And that doesn't mean we can't do anything else. I think of roadmap planning as rocks, pebbles, and sand analogy. I don't know if you've heard about this, right? So those are our big rocks, reliability. Then figure out what are the UX pebbles we can put in, and then figure out what the feature sand we can put in, so that, and then communicate it very broadly, so that as a Hive, now we are all aligned and we're going to help each other achieve that joint goal. And then we can also give the same communication to our execs in our field, because then the Hive says, no, we have looked at it, and therefore we are not going to do so many features. And we as a Hive have looked at it, and here is why we did it. And if the E team disagrees, then at least we have all the information and data to back up our decision. And if they want to override it, that's fine. But hopefully over time, what will happen is it will give more and more autonomy to the Hive and less sort of top-down mandates, if you will.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And I do think that that's where there's pretty significant difference. So from a UX KR perspective, we're looking at things from a holistic standpoint. So what are the things that we know that we need to grow in or that we need to focus on that could impact the entire product? So for example, I put in here for Q3, we're asking a set of designers to do a heuristic UX scorecard for an area that they're not familiar with. So this is tied to learnability that we learned from the SUS research that Adam and team did last quarter. So this gives us a couple of things. One, it focuses on that SUS KPI that we have. And then it also gets broader awareness for our product designers. So our designers become familiar into areas that they are currently not, which then should broaden their scope when they're thinking about, how they're designing things within their own particular area. Later, that should help address the adoption of additional stages, because eventually designers will have so much knowledge about the product, not just specific to their particular area, that we'll be able to close some of those gaps of how does a user transition from using this one area of a product, but then also using another. And so when we're looking at it holistically, and then we are presented with a set of KRs that are specific to, let's say, verify, that's where I think there's just fundamentally there's a difference there. And I think that's what we're running into, which I think it's okay to have differences there. I think for us, it's more, how do we make it very clear for designers, for example, to understand what it is that they are to be working on. And so when we're hearing, well, the Hive KRs are priority over UX KRs, that's conflicting to what message I'm giving to my team when I'm saying that's not necessarily the case. That's just an open for discussion. Let's understand what it is that the Hive is trying to do. Let's compare that to what we're trying to do as a UX department, and then assess priorities from there. So I'm more looking for an open dialogue, and then we can come to an agreement about, what is priority for that quarter for that particular case. But my hesitance is to, to not go into it saying that Hive KRs are more important or that UX KRs are more important. It's just more of, let's have a discussion about it.
Got it. Yeah, and the way I look at it is we are doing an experiment of doing a Hive KR. So that team, we need to give that team the ability to let the Hive decide, which means let the designer of that stage and the PM of that stage and the engineering leader of that stage, let them figure out what is important. And so if they then say, but the exact input that you just shared is an input that the designer brings to the Hive and says, hey, here is why we want to do these XYZ things. And I would advocate for this KR to be part of the Hive KR. So it's not about priority that one supersedes the other. It's about jointly aligning. If this is important, then this should be a Hive KR. Because then the entire Hive signs up for it, because reality is whether we say it or not, the Hive is signing up for it, because that designer's bandwidth is being taken away. And the product manager is expecting that bandwidth to deliver the commitments that the product manager is giving, on the other hand, to customers and business, right? So when we say, oh, sorry, we will just take that bandwidth away, we are violating the handbook DRI principle. And so I want to avoid that, and instead just say, advocate for it. And if the Hive agrees this is important, then create explicit room for the designer and reduce that designer's commitment to the feature expectation. And what that might boil down to is the PM might look at that and say, okay, given that we're going to take one or two designers and create some capacity for this UX KR, which is good for the broader product and therefore will impact us in the long term as well. Well, what are the feature capabilities we can actually deliver without requiring that design? Maybe we prioritize those, right? But then the engineering manager will say, well, yes, I can do that. Great. Or the engineering manager might say, oh, wait, those things that you want us to prioritize because design is not available, well, I can't do them either because my backend team is on reliability, right? And so then what ends up happening is the engineering team is going on reliability, the UX team is taking designers away. There is nothing to deliver that quarter for customers, right? And if that's important, then let the Hive decide that and explicitly say, this quarter, there's going to be no features because we are working on these long reliability and UX items. And that's okay, because then now what the PM can do is spend their time on more market analysis, helping marketing, helping competitive, helping sales. They can spend their energy on doing those things and not have to worry about the monthly cadence of delivering iterative features. But then we are all aligned and we have maximized each function's contributions versus unintentionally creating pockets or gaps in our quad structure, which was built so that everybody's fully occupied and delivering value.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think where my questions are is how would that scale? Because at that point, there are no functional, potentially there could be no functional KRs, because then it would be designers having to advocate for prioritization of something that the UX department is saying is a priority. And then we're talking about, let's say, 20 Hive groups that we're now having to compete for prioritization. So there's that concern. And then additionally, well, we can talk about that one first.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is where the Uber Hive comes into picture, right? So the way I look at it is, if we don't want that to happen, therefore, so Christy and me and Christopher and Steve and Jonathan can come and say, well, this is important, so we are going to call it out as a high signal KR for all of us. And so that's a signal to all the hives that this is more important than the other
Queen
thing.
Bee Hive. That's what it is.
There you go, right? And what that does, therefore, but it still allows the hive to come back and say, we heard you, leadership, but we want to be able to get an exception in our case because we have another fire. And then we say, okay, 80% of the groups are going to do this, 20% get an exception. Versus right now, what's happening is, because we don't have this model, each function feels like as that either give us a top down or don't give us anything. And then when you give it top down, we'll blindly execute on it. And we don't really worry about the fact that we are taking bandwidth away and violating our DRI models, right? So as a business, what we are doing is we say one thing in the handbook, and then with all these top down functional KRs, we are taking bandwidth away. And it's not clear to anybody how much bandwidth is being taken away. What's the impact of that bandwidth being taken away on each hive's result? So it's better that the hive says, we are not going to have GMAO growth other than the organic one, because we are not investing in those capabilities. And that's okay. But then Sid and E-Group then doesn't come and say, why didn't you have GMAO growth? And then next quarter, there's an OKR on GMAO growth. And again, it's top down. So, the more we manage up by setting expectations as a team, the less random top-down stuff comes down to us that's considered urgent. And then the more meaningful things we can do together as a team, and then the hive will get to sort of participate in that.
Okay.
Doesn't preclude top-down, it just makes it slightly different.
Yeah, so thank you for explaining that. So in the example that I provide here about the heuristic UX scorecards.
Yeah.
So this is an exercise to create more awareness and visibility into our product area. Let's say Verify Hive says we're not prioritizing this.
Yeah.
Well, Verify is a critical area of our product. It's a high usage area. It's in our top 3, I believe, when you think about Create and Verify. And I think the third one's debatable. But if we were to say verify is not participating in this, then that is other designers not getting visibility into that area. And then, yeah, I mean, that would be a critical one.
Yeah.
Because what we're trying to do is generate more exposure so that we can get people
Right.
to think more broadly.
Right. And that's exactly the conversation. This is where the real conversation starts, because all of the stuff before that was process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, okay, is there a non-verified designer who's learning about verify? Well, Hive KR should be able to accommodate that. But if you're also saying that there is a verified designer that's going to do something else, then you're taking the verified designer's bandwidth. And so what's the impact to verify for that? That's the articulation that we need. And then we say, okay, so let's bubble. Then I think bring it to the queen bee hive and say, here are the two choices we have. We as a team, we're still unable to align, and that's okay. Now we need you to break the tie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll break the tie for you.
So going back to scalability. So again, my concern is if there are 15, 20 hives, are we having this discussion 15 to 20 times every time UX is presenting a KR? Because each KR that we present, we then have to go and advocate to each hive the importance of it. And I think that's where I'm really hesitant, because we're already, that is the UX role, is we're always needing to advocate for prioritization for something.
Yeah.
So kind of going back to what is the bandwidth expectation? Like how much time or effort is a designer committed to? I don't know. Is that explicitly in the handbook?
No, and in fact, but I think what you're saying, I empathize with that. So I think what a lot of times what functional areas think is they have to advocate, and PMs are not listening, and that's okay. That's our job. We have to say no. Part of our job is to say no, right? But the feeling that you have is the same feeling engineering feels, the same feeling infrastructure feels, the same feeling security feels. But that's not it. It's the same feeling our customers feel. It's the same feeling marketing feels. It's the same feeling sales feels. It's the same feeling customer success feels, STAM and support. Why? Because we all know that our functions are not operating at the best of their abilities. And if we had more bandwidth and more team and more capacity, we could make each of the functions first class, right? And the job that has been given by our CEO and two PMs is to take all those inputs, which is going to be 150 inputs. I'm just going to make this up, and then pick 25 that we can possibly do, because we are only funded for 25, right? So that's like a broader context to remember. So it's not a UX only problem. It's generally
I understand
true.
that.
Then the second piece of it is you're saying, what you're suggesting is, hey, we have systematic product-wide improvements to make in UX. And if each individual team micro optimizes for their local optimizations, it's hard, right?
Yes.
And I think for that is why we do shared OKRs at my level and Christie's level, right? So that's why we picked SAS as a shared OKR to give signal that this is important. Now, if there are more things beyond that UX team wants to do, well, first of all, we have to recognize that we're doing a lot already, right? So there will be some trade-offs. So yes, UX team may want to do 5 things, and no, you're not going to be able to get to do 5 things. You're only going to be able to do 3 things or 2 things. And that's just how it is, right? Now, if we say, no, sorry, we want to do more and we're going to take that bandwidth away, that's when Christy and I have to connect and then decide for you. So that's why I'm saying generally this giving the signal should work for like 80% of the cases. It shouldn't feel like you're fighting. It should feel like you're advocating, but part of advocating is also educating, right? If every designer should talk to their hive and say, hey, look, we're doing this broad thing. You all need to understand it. This is the context in which we are operating, which is great for the engineering manager to know. It's great for the product manager to know. It's great for the test team to know. It's not just happening in a silo. And so that conversation and dialogue that happens in each hive, where each team advocates for what they want to do, I think it's precious. You don't want to lose it, but it shouldn't feel like it's always going to be no, they don't understand us, right? Whoever that they
Sure.
is in that system.
Yeah, and I'm not coming with that attitude. So I'm more of let's have a conversation whenever these come up.
Yeah.
But I do still have concerns about the scalability of this, and because I don't think I'm concerned about the amount of effort we're gonna have to put into conversations ahead of OKRs,
Yeah.
which are already a massive effort for leadership.
Right.
So it's just, yeah.
I think we should note that down as a concern, but we haven't even tried one. So and I think the Hive, this is the only team that's trying the Hive KRs. So my request is give this team a chance to sort of self-regulate, and then they will share with us all the problems that they had, and they can stop, learn. And maybe we say, this just doesn't work for GitLab, and we abandon it. Or we say, hey, there were some good things we learned, but it needs to be tweaked for top-down OKRs.
Sure.
So
yeah,
I agree with
I
your
think we're
sentiment.
open. We're definitely open to the Hive KRs and doing this experimentation. But I hope that it's not the intention that Hive KRs are, like, if this truly is an experiment, let's experiment in the real world. And that is not to say that Hive KRs are by default what we're going to do, which then excludes the verified designers from doing UX KRs, because I don't think that that's what we would want to do.
If the Hive decides the UX KR for the verified designers capacity is required, then they'll do it. And if they collectively decide they can, then they shouldn't do it.
So like Valerie, a good example is we are already aligned with the MRUX widget. Testing has selected five issues where we're contributing to that KR already. And we've already selected another UX KR that we're contributing to on pipeline authoring. But the other issues were like, Vitica is already pinched between several different capacity things, and I have a bunch of features that she's going to be doing. So this is where, like, when continuous integration category got hit, I was like,
yeah, that I understand.
Couldn't contribute to.
Yeah, so that I understand. It's the way that it was approached. The message that I was receiving is that we are being asked to pull our designers off of UX KRs by default, in order to support the Hive KRs, and that's where my concern is. I don't want that to happen. I want there to just be a dialogue about prioritization and capacity, and what is the Hive trying to do? What is the UX department trying to do? What are the possible trade-offs? Because that's what I think this is really, that's what it comes down to. We just need an open dialogue about what it is the capacity is, and I don't want to overwhelm anybody. And if you are saying we can't add Vitica to any more things, then let's talk about that and figure out what to do to move forward.
Right, because we already have 2 or 3 of the UX KRs incorporated in the Hive KRs as a part of our usability KR. So it's not that we're saying no UX KRs are incorporated in the Hive. That isn't what's happening. It was like we reached the saturation point of our capacity, and that we could no longer commit to that based off of what our team threshold was. So we had to start saying no, but that messaging probably got lost in translation clearly. So that makes a lot of sense. And then the last point I have on here in the agenda is around adding UX KPIs to the Hive handbook page, because today we just have usability and adoption through usability as a theme, but we don't have like SUS or UX stat KPIs called out. Would that be a change that we should make?
I would think so, because I think when the moment you say it's Hive, then each functional KPI becomes part of you as a Hive now are on the hook to deliver it or not deliver it or make that trade-off. So to me, GMAO is part of it, but SUS is, UX tech debt is, reliability is, right? And that's why that's when it works as a team. Now, it used to work as a team cohesively when there were not a lot of top-down OKRs and we were moving really fast. I think over the past couple of quarters, we've had a lot more of those. And so it's become harder. So hopefully Hive, and remains to be seen, but hopefully Hive will help bring the team together better. That quad or that Hive will work together better. They will understand each other's needs better. They will understand what the collective goal is better. And they will be able to share with us as leaders. So your designer should be able to share with you saying, this is what I'm planning to do this quarter. Here are the general purpose UX improvements I'm doing, but then here are the other impactful capabilities I'm working on that are going to deliver value. And I feel confident and bought into it, right? And hopefully that's where we want to go, where everybody's bought into it.
Okay.
I know that we're a couple minutes over, but is there anything else, Valerie or Anoop, that we should cover off on?
No, well, I'll say yes. This is hard. It's hard because you're trying to align functions that naturally at GitLab haven't had to do this advocacy discussion. It's because we had this PMS30RI and everybody uses the prioritization from there. And we know the bad side effects of that, right? So we want to avoid that. And that's why we are elevating every function into the Hive to say, bring your, like, advocate for it. And then that way the designers become better advocates for UX craft, engineers, managers become better advocate for tech debt and architecture. And we need this at GitLab because we are starting to scale, right? And we need all of that capability. So I hope this will help, but let's learn from it and see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it plays out. I think Jackie's a great leader and being able to test it out. So I think this is a good one. Yeah, I'm curious how this scales and how we'll be able to manage that for sure. But definitely, I'm a big advocate of trying something and seeing if it works. And if it doesn't, then we change it or we don't do it again. So
yeah, and in the past, I've seen it scale when we trust the Hive and give them autonomy because they have so much more detail than we do at our level. So it's very
sure.
easy for
Yeah,
us to say,
I think my hesitancy on the scalability aspect of it is, are we looking at the right perspective? So this can have a tendency to create silos, additional siloing to a central product area or a certain product area. And we are challenged with creating a product that is end to end for the entire DevSecOps workflow. And our biggest gaps are the in-between states. So traversing from one product area to another. And I'm really curious at how we can make sure that we're still keeping that, or we still make an investment in addressing that when we have hives that are going to be, the appearance is more isolated and thinking about, their particular group.
And maybe that's a requirement. Maybe that's a requirement for the hives, is that the hives have to contribute to cross-stage experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a part of a KR, is that we commit to a percentage of our experiences, or there's working groups that are about implementing shared pajama components, or we have to sustain that same workflow.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, and I think that's how it scales, where you give very liberal autonomy, but then when you find areas, then you bring in a top down, and then you measure all your hives on that top down.
Yeah.
All right, I gotta go. Thank you. Bye.